Good morning. Good morning.
Okay, good
Morning.
morning.
Hello, hello.
Okay, we're just at the end of 35B, um, and we've been learning about the law of chazazis. Chazazis is a topic talked about much in Shulchan Aruch. We have this type of boil or blister protruding from the esrog, and our Gemara had told us that, we learned it in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said also chazazis. The Mishnah had said that if you have a chazazis, it depends if it's on the majority of the esrog. If you have this blister boil on the majority of the esrog, it's invalid. If it's on the minority, then it's kosher. And the Mishnah also mentioned nitla pitmasai. The pitum was broken off, which is another Gemara we learned yesterday. So the pitum broke off, or the chazazis is on the majority. These are all puzzle, these are invalid. If the chazazis, the boil, is on the miut, it's on the minority, or the ukats came off, then it's going to be kosher. And so the Gemara that we learned, so we mentioned about the chazazis that initially Rav Chizda had said this in the name of Rav, that there's a difference between a chazazis in one place and a chazazis in two or three places. So initially, the understanding of Rav Chizda's quotation from Rav was that he was saying that chazazis in one place is invalid. Two or three places, then it's going to be valid. And of course, the Gemara Rava asks a question on this: how could such a thing be? If one is bad, you got two or three of them, that's for sure bad. So the Gemara said, yeah, it'll be manumar. It'll be considered like it's spotted. It's like it has different
Leopard.
blemishes, like a leopard, different blemishes together, different areas, or, makes it look, more looks manure, looks like a leopard, looks like it's spotted. So the Gemara says, yeah, it must be the opposite. That if something is in one place, it's kosher. If it's in two or three places, then it'll be invalid. Now, initially we thought that if it's in two or three places, it's going to be. If it's in one place, it's invalid. If it's in two or three places, it's going to be valid. That didn't make sense. The Gemara says no, it must be the opposite. That somewhere where the halach is that one place is going to be valid, two or three places of boils is going to be invalid. Where is that? So that's on the safe of the end part of the Mishnah, where the end part of the Mishnah talks about the case where you have boils on the minority of the esrog. If it's in one place, one area, you have boils, okay, no problem. But if it's in two or three areas, that is going to be it's going to be manumar and it's invalid. It's going to be considered spotted, speckled, or spotted. Therefore, it's invalid. Okay, so that, and then yesterday we spoke a little about commentaries struggle why it says two or three places in Shulchan Aruch. You know, if two was invalid, then why does it have to say three? And so the commentaries struggle a little to try to figure out why it says two or three, and it doesn't just suffice with saying two. You know, two places. It should be invalid. For the Kesef Mishnah's question on that the Kesef Mishnah asks on the Rambam. Um, so it goes through a few they go through a few answers in the commentaries that that it says two or three, meaning that it has to be emphasizing, it has to be sufficient space in between the two or three. It can't just be a tiny dot, tiny hair breadth, and has to be equal to the size of The size um, uh, of the speckled parts has to be in between. That's one idea. Another interpretation. We mentioned these yesterday. That it's emphasizing it has to be on the majority of the esrog. It's two or three. It's emphasizing it has to still cover the majority, although that's subject to an argument if it has to cover the majority of the esrog. Um, when you have two or three, when you have one, it has to cover the majority. When you have two or three, do we count the two or three and calculate, well, you're in this situated here, you're situated there, you're situated there? That covers the majority of the esrog. So there is such an understanding that even when you have three, our Gemara was saying that if you have one, if it's on the minority, it's going to be valid esrog. If you have two or three, they take they are counted. Even the space in between them is all counted for the majority of the esrog. That's one way of understanding the Gemara, the Ravid's understanding of the Gemara, that when you have two or three, it's not that two or three automatically make it invalid. It's two or three, we're able to calculate even the space in between them to be considered a majority of the esrog. Another pshat is that it just means as many as you have will invalidate it. It just gives two or three, but it means unlimited. And then we had that there is a concept that if you have uh, two esrogim and there is a hiddur to have two versus three. It's emphasizing that three is worse than two. I don't know if that's interesting insight. That's why it says two or three. That's one of the commentaries wants to say that it's better to use the one that has two than to use the one that has three. The Gemara is saying that it's invalid. So when are you going to use it? What does that exactly mean? If in a case where it is valid and it has two or three, not exactly sure how to translate that commentary. The Or Sameach says such a pshat. Take a look. But anyway, these are different interpretations why it says two or three. Okay, we spoke about it yesterday. Then the Gemara mentioned that the chaytam, of the esrog, even one chazaz, even one area of a chazazis that's even and it's mashu, even small, it's puzzle, it's invalid. And the reason is because it's much more visible in that choitam, in the nose part of the esrog. And of course, this is the topic of discussion. Where is that nose part of the esrog? We mentioned yesterday that it's the top third. It's really where it starts sloping and going, where the slope starts beginning and all the way up till the top, till the point. And that seems to be the view of the Rush. The way Rashi says it, it's a little it is a little interesting because if you're not careful, from Rashi you could learn it that way, that it means the same thing, but the commentaries don't understand it that way, because if you look at the wording of Rashi, Rashi doesn't say from there and upward. Rashi, and the Rashi called the V'choitmai, the Rashi that's like maybe 10 lines up from the bottom of the page, that Rashi, V'choitmai, on page 35b, you have Rashi there about 10 lines up from the bottom. He says, Ba'oive goivhoi, the choitam is the thickness of its height, which means that there's an area that's very wide, and from there it starts getting narrower. Shemashapea misham, that from there it starts sloping v'yoyred and goes down with sad reisha towards its top. So where is the choitam? If you read Rashi very carefully, Rashi is saying the thickness is where the choitam is, that's the area that from there it actually slopes down, which means that Only the thick area is the actual chaitim. And Rashi, in the next Rashi says that it's visible to the eye more than other places because in that thickness, a person puts his eyes. So what Rashi is, the commentaries learn it this way, that what he means is that the chaitim is actually a ring around the esrog that's at the thickest part of the, that's at the thick part of the esrog right before it starts sloping. That's the way Rashi, that's the chaitim. It's not the commonly accepted view, but that's the way Rashi, if you look in the wording of Rashi, that's what Rashi seems to be saying, that it's right before it starts sloping. That ring is called the chaitim, and that ring is the most important area of the esrog. The Rush, who seems that Shulchan Aruch follows the Rush's view, and that's the one we mentioned yesterday, the common understanding, common view is that it's from the slope and upward. That whole area is called the nose of the esrog, and that's the most important area, that it should be clean of blemishes like this chazozis, because even a chazot, mashu, even just a speck of a chazozis is a problem on the upper area, and it really is that whole area, according to the Rush, it's that whole area from the slope and onward and upward. So that would be that's what brought in Shulchan Aruch as well, and that's what Rava is saying over here, that on the Choitim, whatever, however you want to hold. Now there are other opinions as well. I mentioned the Rashi and the Rush. There is also opinions that it actually means somewhere up there by the Pittum. It's the that the either the Shaishanta is called the Pittum. I have to look up what 1 second. What is the Choitim? What do the other opinions hold? There's the Ritva. It's Makom Shemimeno Hadad Yoitze. It's the area where the Pittum comes out of. So according to the Ritva, it's um, it's the just below the Pittum, below that top little part, and then the Rambam holds it's the entire flesh of the Pittum, not the Sheshanta, excuse me, but it's the entire flesh of the Pittum. That's the way the Rambam holds. So according to the Rambam, according to the Ritva, it's like a much smaller area than according to the Rosh, which we said is the whole sloped up area all the way up to the Pittum. That was the Rosh's opinion, all the way up to the Pittum, the top, right? That whole area is considered the Chaitim, not the Pittum itself, according to the Rosh, but up to the Pittum, from the slope all the way up to the top, right before the Pittum. That would be the Rosh's opinion. And again, Rashi holds it's that just a ring around it, around the esrog, right where it's thick, right before it starts sloping. So these are all different opinions of what the Pittum, what the what the chaitim is, where to be extra careful. And again, Shulchan Aruch follows the Rosh's view. So this law applies. I would say the practical application of this law is not so much by a chazazis, by the boil, but it will apply for black dots and black spots on the esrog. That's where, or white spots, which aren't as common. Black spots are more common, but there are colors that are considered invalid by an esrog. One of them is white, one of them is black. These are problematic colors, and they would be much more seriously they would much more be much more they could ruin the kashrus of the esrog if it's on the chaitim. It's on that area that's called the chaitim. And again, this would be a topic of discussion. What area is that? Okay. Then the Gemara said, Nitla pitmase, the pittum was removed. If the pittum is removed, so the the Mishnah said that it's puzzle. If the uketz is removed, the Mishnah said it's kosher. That was the two statements that were like the contrast between missing the pitum, missing the uketz. And the Gemara said that Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar learned nitla not pitmasai but buchnasai. That's the way Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar learned. Now, what does that mean? Nitla buchnasai. He's trying to explain the Mishnah. It seems that he's explaining instead of the word pitam, he's using the word buchna. And buchna means the pestle, that the pestle was removed. So Rashi brings two interpretations, and we read Rashi inside yesterday. This Rashi, the third to last Rashi on the page, that the pitam looks like a buchna, looks like this pestle, and then that was the first opinion that Rashi says in the name of his teacher Rabbeinu Yaakov. Then he has Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi. Rashi brings, it's interesting, Rashi often does not bring the names of his teachers. He doesn't say he gets it from his teachers. It's like a very rare Rashi that he's quoting two teachers of his, and one of them he doesn't like. It seems like it's his teacher. I don't know, Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi. Truth is, he doesn't call him Moiri. So I shouldn't say that the second one is his teacher. He doesn't say Moiri. He doesn't say my teacher. He says Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi explained it this way, and he argues with him. He says, what does Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi learn? He learns that the esrog, the sign of an esrog, is that it's supposed to have the stem indented into the esrog, that the esrog has a little hole on the bottom. In other words, the esrog has an indention on the bottom, and the stem sticks, not like a lemon that everything protrudes, the bottom, the stem sticks out. But the esrog, it's indented, and the stem goes into the ear space of the esrog. And so, according to Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi, what Rashi brings from him is that the uketz is the area that is outside of the ear space of the esrog, and the pitum is what's inside the airspace of the esrog. And when Rabbi Yitzchok ben Elazar in the Gemara says Nidla Buchnasai, what he's saying is that a buchna, the pestle, goes into the mortar, and that's what he was emphasizing here. That you know what the pitum is, that it takes all, it's the pestle that's in the mortar. That's, if that was removed, that's a problem. Meaning the stem that's inside the airspace of the esrog, if that's removed, that's where it's a problem. And which I mentioned, the practical side of that would be that if you buy an esrog, make sure that the stem of the esrog is intact, because if the stem is removed, even though everything else is out, according to Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi, that is called the pitum that has been removed, and the Mishnah says it's invalid. And so, if you want to follow, and I don't know, I didn't look it up in Shulchan Aruch what the halacha is according to the final verdict in Shulchan Aruch. But there is definitely an opinion, Rabbeinu Yitzchok Halevi, that holds that if the stem is missing, even though the whole esrog is intact, but that stem part that's in the ear space of the esrog, that is called the pitum, according to him. That's called the buchna, according to him, and the pitum. And if that's removed, the Mishnah says it's invalid. But Rashi says, I don't agree with that pshat, because we don't find, he says, Lashon Rabbeinu Yaakov sounds to me correct, because we don't find anywhere where the pitum is the stem. So Rashi doesn't seem to like this pshat of Rabbeinu Yitzchok. He says, he says very diplomatically, the pshat of Rabbeinu Yaakov sounds more sounds more correct to me. Sounds more appealing to me. Okay. Now we're up to the next Gemara. Tana Rabbi Yitzchok Niklaf. We're up to the Gemara Niklaf, where it's peeled. Okay, so we're going to start here. Niklaf, 3 lines up from the bottom of the page, 35b. Niklaf, if it was peeled. The Mishnah said, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said if it was peeled, it's going to be invalid. Niklaf. Well, let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, together with the also chazozis in nitla pitmasai niklaf, and then nistak nikev v'chaser kolshu puzzle. All of these cases are puzzled, so it includes niklaf amongst a bunch of other cases that are invalid. Now, the Gemara says as follows: I'm Rava. Rava says, "Hi esrega, this esrog, the iglad kahina sumka, this esrog that was peeled." Iglad means peeled, the aglad, that it was peeled. Ka'ahina sumka, like, and it looks like a tamara aduma, Rashi says, a red date. So in other words, once the esrog is peeled, it gets a reddish color. And Rashi says similar to other fruits, once they're peeled, the oxygen, I guess, the air causes it to get discolored, so it turns reddish. It's like so this esrog that was peeled, and it looks like a red tamara, a red date. A kshera, it is kosher. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Niklaf puzzle. How could Rava say such a thing? The Mishnah says if it's peeled, it's invalid. You're telling me if it's peeled and it turns a little reddish, it's invalid. So the Gemara says, like Hasher, now we turn the page. Haba kula, haba mektsasa. Which says that like it's not a kasha. There's a difference between if it's completely reddish and peeled, or only if part of it is peeled and reddish. The way Rashi learns, if it's completely peeled, it's kosher. And if it's partially peeled, that's when it's going to be invalid, and because it's going to now be spotted, it's going to be menumer. Now, Benu Hananel, of course, learns the opposite, because logically, does that make sense? You peel the whole thing, it's going to be kosher. If you peel part of it, then it's going to be invalid. You know, although the truth is, we do find similar things throughout Shas and throughout the halacha. You find halachas that like tzaras. If tzaras is on the whole body, it's all of a sudden it's kosher. It's not impure. You know, you do find such sort of like oxymorons that you have things that seem strange. You know, there's a halacha that if everyone paskins about a death penalty, that the person deserves the death penalty, and no one argues, then we don't give him the death penalty. Like you have such cases. So here also, according to Rashi, the whole esrog is peeled, it's kosher. If partially it's peeled, then it's going to be a problem because now it's spotted.
Don't we have the same thing with Tuma as we
Tuma as we exist. To explain, what do you mean?
We're all Tame,
right?
So therefore, we can do.
Oh, Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. Because they Tuma Hutra B'tzibur, you have a similar idea that if everyone's Tame, it's okay. Only a few people are Tame. They have to wait till Pesach Sheni, and they have to change halachas around, and can't right. They can't use tame oil, tame things, tame oil and things. If everyone's tame, then it's okay. Yeah. Shkoyach, yeah. Good example. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, the Bayamla states that Potiphar's wife once had some friends over, and she gave each of them an esrog and a knife, and then she called for Yosef to come into the room. And when he did, since they were all admiring him, they started peeling their fingers rather than the esrog.
Yeah, who this was Potiphar's wife did that?
Yes, yes,
And it uses the term es. It was the esrig there that they were.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Uh-huh. All right, that's the esrig the peeled esrig story. Right. Okay, good. So so this is the Machlokes Rabbeinu Hananel and the and Rashi. Rabbeinu Hananel learns the opposite shot when the Gemara says Bekula b'mektsasa, it means Bekula, if the whole thing is peeled, it's invalid. If b'mektsasa, if it's that's the if it's b'mektsasa only part of it, then it's going to be kosher. And we'll soon see that there's a similarity between these laws and the laws of Trefus, and it seemed like Rabbeinu Hanana learned commentaries say that he's basing it on a comparison to the laws of Trefus of an animal. That if the whole all the skin was removed from the animal, it's a trefa. If some of it is still there, it's going to be kosher. Yeah. So that's what that seems like the source of Rabbeinu Hananel. Now, the Gemara continues. Nistak nikev. If it was cracked or there's a hole and it's missing, uh, if it's missing, then it's invalid. Missing kolshu, it says, even a small amount, any amount. But if it's not missing anything, then it's going to be kosher. Okay, so Tani Ula Barchanina, Ula Barchanina taught Nikev Nekev Mafudash, if the esrog got a hole that is goes mafulish through and through, all the way through. So if it's the law is b'mashahu that it is invalid with even a small hole, like let's say a needle stuck in through the esrog. Now, if it's not through, the invalidation is only if the nekev, if the hole is the thickness, the width, excuse me, of a coin called an isser, ke'isser. Now, what does the Mishnah mean when it says nikev v'lei chaser? It's kosher. That when it says it was a hole that it's going to be if it's not missing anything, it's kosher. That's when that's talking about if it's smaller than the size of a isur and it doesn't go all the way through. So Rashi over here says on the top Rashi, he says that Ula Bar Chanina taught he's going on Nike V'loi Chaser, that when it's Nike V'loi Chaser, and it's kosher when it's nikev and it's not missing anything, it's kosher. On this, he says that if it's mafulish, if it goes through all the puzzle, and if it doesn't go through, then it's like an isar, it's going to also be puzzle. Now, he's talking about you're not missing anything. He's talking about that you have, let's say, some type of a peg or something you're sticking in, and in such a case, it's going to be invalid. You didn't take anything out of it; you just caused there to be a hole. So the Mishnah, Rashi spells out. He says the Mishnah says it's kosher. That's talking about it's less than an isser and it's not mafulish. That's the understanding. That it's not mafulish, it doesn't go all the way through, and it's not the size of an isser of this coin, then it's going to be kosher, the Mishnah says. Okay. Now, the Gemara continues. Boy Rava. Rava asks a question. Noldu be'esrog simani treifa. If the esrog grew or was got the signs of an animal that can't live for more than it's a treifa, which means it's going to die within a certain amount of time um, because of its sickness. Um, I think generally the accepted amount of time means 6 months, but Rashi just says beheman trefes ba, signs of a treifa, that it's that it was meaning that it was uh, nitraf. It has the law of being torn apart through these signs. What are these signs? So what happens if it happens to an esrog? So the Gemara goes through. My kami boile. What are we talking about? Which signs? E niklaf. If we're talking about that the animal that the like by an animal that it was peeled, meaning the skin was removed. So then Rava's asking this question about niklaf. Uh, if the skin is removed, he's asking what is the law of an esrog if it has the simanim of a treifa, of an animal that's going to die. Basically, we use that term treifa to mean all types of non-kosher food, but the real word treifa means that an animal was wounded. Generally, taraf means torn apart. It's wounded because another animal tore it apart, and that's the term treifa. And according to halacha, such meat is non-kosher for us to eat. Seemingly, where the scientific reason behind that would be that we're nervous that that the animal could be affected or infected in some way, and could be not safe, so to speak. But of course, it's a halach. It's a law in the Torah. Basar basada treifa loisaychelun kelav tashlichon loisay, that that a treifa is usher, and so the question is, what happens if an esrog has the signs of a treifa? Would that also make the esrog invalid? So the Gemara's first thought is maybe he means niklaf. The skin of the esrog is peeled off, similar to an animal, that one of the signs of a treifa, that it's called a gluda. That means that the skin was peeled off, and the Gemara says Tanina. We learned it in our Mishnah that if it's peeled, it's invalid. So nistak, maybe he means that it's a sign of a treifa called nistak, that it's cracked, and we know that by an animal, if the windpipe is cracked, and the law is that it would be a treifa, it would be non-kosher, and so maybe that's what it means. Rashi says gargeres shanistika kula, the whole windpipe is cracked completely, and you don't have any chulya, any ring. What do you want to say? Translate.
What a vertebrae, right?
Like a vertebrae in the the trachea, that none of it is intact. It's it's all been cracked. It's cracked completely.
Which would be where you would normally shech the animal.
Yeah, that's one of the two main simanim where you would shech the animal. But what happens if it's cracked? So the law is it's treifa, and so Rav is wondering about a cracked esrog. So the Gemara says, "What do you mean, Tanina? We also learned that in our Mishnah. The Mishnah says it's puzzle, it's invalid. Nikev, what about if there's a hole in it? And here we're thinking that we're talking about that there's a hole in the krum hamoyach, in the brain, the artery or the vein that goes into the. There must be some better term, I don't know. Of the brain, that there's some type of a pipe that goes into the brain, and if that was punctured, nikev. So the law is that in an animal that's called a treifa. And Rava is asking this question: what about if it has simani treifa? Maybe he means that it's
Rabbi,
that
isn't
Nikev. I'm sorry.
Isn't chrome a membrane?
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm not so good at translating such medical terms, but yeah, yeah, I guess maybe that's a better word. Membrane of the brain.
Right.
Um, okay, so the question is, what would be the law if it's punctured? So by a treifa, it's invalid. By a animal, it's called a treifa. It's invalid. So the Gemara says, Tanina. We also learned this in the Mishnah. Nikev, that if it's punctured and if it doesn't go, it's not missing anything, and this is kosher actually. So it's not missing anything. The Mishnah said if it's like chaser, it would be kosher. So what is this question of Rava about the treifa by a treifa? So the Gemara says, Kikomi boile. You know what his question was? That it has a sign of a treifa. It's kedu'ula. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Like Ula says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That what is the case? Reya, a lung, shenishbacha kekitain. That the flesh of the lung dissolved and it became liquid. It's basically melted. Nishbacha kekitain. It in these membranes of the reya of the lung, and it's like turned into like a watery substance. Basar shabasecha krumni mayach manasik mayim. Rashi says the flesh inside the membrane it melted and it became like water. So the Gemara says regarding the laws of animals. So Ula says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Such a scenario is ksheira. Amar Rava, and Rava says, "V'hu dekaima simfainaha." That law that it's kosher is only if the simfainos, which are
Those are the lungs.
what do you call it?
Those are the lungs. Siphon.
No, but no, I think that's it's part of the lung, but it's the tubes that go, or the lobes, maybe the symphyna. I don't know. Maybe Robert, you have the art scroll. What is how do they translate the symphyna? Page 36a, 36a, and probably number 1, probably page 1, 36a1, maybe 2. The symphynaha of the lungs. We're talking about the lungs. It might even have a picture there. So it liquefies, but the symphynaha are still intact. The lung, the flesh of the lung liquefied, and the symphynites, which are these empty. The translation is the empty reeds that go from the lungs, from the trachea into the lungs. Okay, maybe you call it. Maybe that is called the lungs. Okay, I don't know.
No, it's not. But the lung we usually think of as the basar, but this is it's like a branches
into the lungs. Yeah, I guess that would be a translation.
They call it bronchial tubes, I think.
Oh, maybe that's it. Okay, fine. Maybe that's what it would be. Bronchial tubes. So, but you're right, Ezra. It is the lungs. I'm just saying. I think it's specific. It's a specific part of it. So the symphynaha, these symphonites, they have to still be intact. They didn't dissolve. So the Gemara says that it's kosher if it's kaima symphina. Like kaima symphina, if they're not intact, if these bronchial tubes, maybe that's the translation. I don't know. Robert, did you find it over there? Yeah, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're muted. I don't know. Maybe you were telling us.
Okay, no, I mean the part of it is thus we see that the dissolving of the interior of a lung can be a sign of terefa, depending on the condition of the bronchial tubes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bronchial tubes.
Okay.
Okay, you got
Yeah.
it. Jeffrey got it. Okay, very good. Thank you. So yeah, the bronchial tubes we'll call the symphona. So the Gemara says that if they're not kaimi, if they did dissolve treifa, then it is a treifa. So hachamai, what would be the law by an esrog? What would be the law by an esrog that let's say the flesh of the esrog dissolves, but nevertheless you still have the area where the seeds are that would be understood maybe to be like the bronchial tubes. The flesh of the esrog dissolved like the flesh of the lung, but the area where the seeds are that stayed intact. So the Gemara is asking, so what would be the law in such a case? So the Gemara says, Dilma hasam hu delay shalit ba avira hadar bari. Maybe over there by the lungs, it's not called a treifa if the bronchial tubes are intact, because the air is not affecting it because it's still covered over. It's inside the body. So it'll get better. So therefore, we don't call it a treifa. But here, where the by an esrog, where the esrog is not going to get better because the air is going to affect it. The air will affect it, and the esrog is going to cause it to never get better. It can't heal, so to speak. So there it could heal, or maybe it doesn't make a difference. So what it seems like is that that it's punctured, or it's somehow it can be impacted by the air. And what does that mean? If it has the skin on it, what about the fact that the skin is on it? Somehow, I guess that doesn't help, or does it understand it to be that it's punctured? It's a little unclear why here it's not going to get better. What does it mean that the air that the avira is shalit ba? It'll affect it. I guess maybe if it's much deeper inside the body, the lungs. Here it's right by the skin. Maybe that's what it means. In any event, that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, Tashima coming here. Esrog tapuach, saruach, kavush. If you have an esrog that's blown up, or saruach, smelly. We'll soon see what they are. But kavush, it's soaking, and it's kavush. It's been soaking. Rashi says in vinegar or in mustard. Shaluk. It's been cooking a lot. It's been cooking a lot in hot water. And kushi. It's black. Lavan. It's white. Umanumar. And if it's speckled, puzzle, these are all cases that it's invalid. And the Gemara says, esrog kakador, if the esrog is shaped like a ball, puzzle, it is invalid. And some say that also if you have twin esrogim, which means they're attached, they were grown together and attached together. So it really looks like they should be cut in half because they look like two esrogim. So tiyum, that's an esrog that's called the tiyum. Af yeshayimim af hatiyum and some say also the tiyum is also pasul. Esrog ha-boiser, an esrog that wasn't grown completely. Boiser is a common term in the laws of Zerayim, the laws of fruits, that if it's not fully grown, it's called boiser. It's a certain stage of its growth that's hasn't ripened, hasn't reached the final stage of growth, and so it's so the esrog that's not fully grown. So Rabbi Kiva Paisel v'chachamim machshirin. Rabbi Kiva says it's invalid, and the rabbis say that if it reached that stage, it's considered good enough. It's considered valid. And now, or if it's considered hadar, it seems like there's other ways of understanding it. Maybe there's a one commentary says here that it means that it's an issue of that if it's boiser, it could be that it's not beautiful because it didn't reach its full stage of growth. So the rabbis hold that it's considered hadar, it's good enough. But either way, there's an argument about a boiser and the esrog, this stage of the esrog growth, if it would be pasul or kosher, Rebbe Akiva, or the rabbis. Gidlai b'defus. This is an interesting case where you grew the esrog with a form of mold around it. And what would be the law if you got it to be in a certain, made it in a certain form, and and you made it
Min bria
acheres, to look like something different than an esrog. Puzzle, all of these cases, it would be invalid. It's an interesting idea. That sounds like if you would make it like the perfect esrog, they could have the monopoly of all the best esrogim, grow them in molds. Anyway, Katani Miyas. So the Gemara says, we learned, however, that tapuach, that the esrog that's the tapuach or saruach, we learned about those two cases. So the Gemara says, what are these cases? Lav tapuach mibachutz. Doesn't tapuach mean that it's the outer area is rotted or from the outside, and saruach is mibafnim. And saruach, the smell that it's smelly means it rotted on the inside, which basically means that it dissolved, melted into a liquid. So that would be saruach, and the outer skin is there, but in such a case, it would be very similar to the case of the lung, that the flesh of the lung dissolved and melted and became liquidy, and it would seem that the law is that it's invalid in such a case. Maybe that's the case. That's exactly the case of the saruach. The Gemara says, no. Can't bring a proof from there. Idi ve'idi, both of these cases, tapuach and saruach, are mibachutz, are on the outside. V'loi kashin, it's not a kasha. Why does it say both cases? Because had the tafach, this case is that it expanded, swelled, afal pi deloi sarach, even though it didn't rot. And ha, this sarach, afal pi avagav deloi tafach. This one, it sort of rotted, but it didn't expand, and that would be the two cases. So we're not talking about a case of where it dissolves and liquefies and so on.
The inside,
where the inside liquefies. We're talking about the outside, so you can't compare the two, and so we don't have a answer about the law of this similarity with trephas. We don't know what would be the law about such an esrog. So my advice is, if you come to buy an esrog, shake it and just make sure you don't hear any liquid on the inside, so you don't have this question of Rava If it would be considered similar to treifa by an animal, it might be puzzle. Amar Mar, next Gemara, Mar Master said, Esrog Kushi puzzle. The Esrog that comes from Ethiopia is invalid. But Tanya Kushi kosher, but didn't we learn in a different brisa that Kushi is kosher? So the Gemara says Kushi kosher and Daimela Kushi is puzzle only if it's similar to a esrog that is from Ethiopia, similar to an esrog of Ethiopia, then it's puzzle. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, what would that mean? If it's a kushi, if it's from Ethiopia, it's invalid. If it's similar to a kushi, then if it's similar to Ethiopian esrog, it's going to be invalid. If it's kushi, it's kosher. It's kosher. If it's similar to a kushi, it's puzzle. It's invalid. So what that means is that in Ethiopia, that's the normal look of an esrog, and so in Ethiopia, this esrog would actually be kosher, but if it's outside of Ethiopia and you have such an esrog that's similar to Ethiopian esrog, which means it's if it grew here, but it looks like the esrog of Ethiopia, so it's going to be invalid because it doesn't fit with the esrogim according to its nature, where it's naturally grown. So, in other words, the fact that if it grew in Ethiopia, if it grew there, it would be kosher. If it grew somewhere else and it looks like it, that would be a problem because it's not looking like its natural growth. So Abaye says that. So 1 second. So we asked a contradiction. Because first we said esrog kushi is invalid. Then we said that no, an Ethiopian esrog is actually kosher. That's the natural look of an esrog in Ethiopia. That's the way an Ethiopian esrog is supposed to look. And if it's similar to a kushi, if it grew somewhere else and it grew somewhere else and it looks like an Ethiopian esrog, so it grew not naturally, not normal to the way it should have grown, then it's going to be invalid. So that seems to be a contradiction. Is a Ethiopian esrog kosher or not? So Amar Abaye says, Kitananami masnisin daimel kushi tanan. Abaye says, our Mishnah also that it says the kushi is invalid, the Ethiopian esrog is invalid. It doesn't really mean an Ethiopian esrog is invalid. It means if it's similar to an Ethiopian esrog, then it would be invalid. But actually, an Ethiopian esrog would be kosher. Rava says, like kasha. It's not a question. Rava has a different answer. Hold on. This is for the people of Bavel, and for us in Baluhu, this is for them, and for the people in Eretz Yisrael. Now, in Bavel, we are used to having Bavel, Babylon is not far from Ethiopia, and therefore it's people use these type of esrogim, and for people in Eretz Yisrael, this wouldn't be valid. Why does it matter where you are? So the answer is that the concept of hadar, beauty, is based on what you're used to. And here, this is the common esrogim that we have. So this is called beautiful. It's an issue of hadar. So then it really depends on the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's
the image that you have of it, that you learn. The image of the perfect one.
What you get used to. In Bavel, that's what they used to. That's what they think, to them, that's normal. That's beautiful. That's okay. That's kosher. That's good. If you're, if you live somewhere else, then that's what, for them, that's not hadar. It's an interesting rule about hadar that you see in certain areas in the Gemara how certain rules of hadar are absolute. Certain rules of hadar seem to be based on exterior factors, based on where you're located. Like, okay, now comes the next piece of Gemara. Esrog haboiser Rabbi Kiva plays a chomach shirin. This esrog that's boiser, again, boiser is this concept that it's not grown fully, and Rabbi Kiva says it's invalid. Rabbis say it's kosher. Amar Rabba says Rabbi Akiva, Reb Shimon, Amru davar echad. Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon both hold to the same thing. Rabbi Akiva hadamar. Rabbi Akiva, we have the brisa this brisa that we just quoted, and Reb Shimon, what's Reb Shimon say? That it was taught in a Mishnah. Reb Shimon paiter esos regim. The Kaitnan, Rabbi Akiva exempts esrogim from Meiser when they're still young, at a young stage. And what basically the Gemara is understanding from that Mishnah is that it's based on the fact that because it's not reached the stage of growth that's appropriate to call it a fruit, it's not a fruit. It's considered it's not a fruit yet. And therefore it's not chayv and meiser. You don't have to take tithes from it. So the same thing would be that he would probably hold, like Rabbi Akiva here, that it's invalid as an esrog. Creates hadar, has to be a fruit. And Rabbi Akiva would probably agree with Reb Shimon about the laws of meiser, that it's not going to be considered chayiv and meiser, obligated and meiser. There's a certain stage that has to reach in order to be obligated to tithe. Before that stage, it's not a fruit. You don't have to tithe it. You don't have to tithe a growth, some type of a weed coming. You have to tithe the. If it just has the stem, it's only a fruits you have to tithe, not the stems. So if it's not, it's a tiny little kernel, didn't grow anything, hardly grew. It's not a fruit yet. You don't have to tithe it. Amalei Abaye says, Dilma Loi, maybe that's not so. Maybe they disagree. I'd kind of like Rabbi Akiva, Hacha, to be an hadar. Veleka. Rabbi Akiva did not say his halacha only over here. Doesn't say it, but because of the concept of hadar. And that's why he holds by the esrog that's beiser. It's not kosher, not because it didn't grow enough, but because it's not beautiful. And Abul Hassam, but over there, regarding the laws of Meiser, it is a fruit. It's just not beautiful. Maybe he'll like the rabbis who argue with Reb Shimon, and they hold that you're obligated in taking Meiser. Inami, or also, I can like Reb Shimon Hassam. It could be that Reb Shimon doesn't say over there regarding Meiser that this esrog that's so young is exempt from Meiser. Ella dechsiv asetas is called vasarecha. That it says over there that you're not chayiv in Meiser only kederech shabnei adam might see in Lizriya. It's tvuas zarecha. It has to be the you have to take tithing from the tvua of your seeds. So the Gemara has an interesting understanding of what that means, that it has to be a stage where you could grow from its seed another growth. It has to be tuas zarecha, something that's a potential to regrow, to reproduce. And in this stage, it's not able to reproduce. It's not chayiv in meiser. But here, regarding the arba minim, regarding the law of an esrog, that's a beiser. Maybe he would hold that it's kosher, that it's kosher. Maybe he holds that it's kosher. So the Gemara says, "V'sulay midi." Turn the page. V'sulay midi. There is that's the final conclusion. So it seems that there's a discussion in the commentaries. What's the final reason for Rabbi Akiva? Why is Rabbi Akiva invalidating it? Is it because it's too young, or could it be because it's not hadar?